Good evening, everyone in Alberta, Canada, and beyond. It is Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, and I'm Kerry Lambert, and I welcome you to an online webinar, Evening of Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, also known as APP. APP's purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and sovereignty by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship with Canada. Of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without your help. If you can, please share this webinar. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Rumble, as well as after the live. We're also on other video and audio sites like Apple, Spotify, Vimeo, etc. These webinars do take time and effort, and we're starting with sponsorships on our webinars. If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming webinar, you can get in contact with us at contact@albertaprosperityproject.com. Which is also on the top of the Alberta Prosperity Project page right here under contact. And with that, tonight's sponsor is our very own Whistle Stop Cafe. So we're using the little ticker at the bottom to advertise them and their logo, as well as showing a short video for them. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for sponsoring with us, Alberta Prosperity Project. And let's see if we can jump right into this. Once again, Whistle Stop Cafe, thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Chris here from Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. We just had our Freedom Riders Saturday Family Fun Day, and as you can see, the place has been packed pretty much the whole time. So anyway, yeah, that's the Whistle Stop on a kind of a semi-crazy event weekend, and we're planning to do lots more of these. It's amazing, and it's something we've been missing over the last couple of years, so we're really excited to be part of this going forward.
And there we go. So that's what a sponsorship video looks like. And of course, we've got the little ticker going at the bottom. And I believe we'll also show, there's the Whistle Stop. Actually, we'll put both of them up there, the Whistle Stop and APP, to show that we're sponsoring. So if you want to get involved with that and basically be seen by anywhere between, I'm going to say, a few thousand to 50,000 plus, and you're like-minded and you have a service or goods that you want to showcase, or if you have another idea, maybe you got an event going on here and you want to show that, that would be great as well. So with that, I'm also going to talk a little bit about APP, of course. APP memberships are 1 year for $20, 2 years for $30, 3 years for $40, or you can make a donation at albertaprosperityproject.com. We have a few things that are going on. I'm going to just leak a little bit. We actually have a Tucker Carlson event coming up here. And actually, I'm going to just quickly show that because we have our buddies over at the Western Standard who are also doing this with us. Tucker Carlson in Edmonton, the evening of Wednesday, January 24th. And APP has, I believe, 100 tickets. If you are a member, you get a discounted price. I believe that price is going to be $175. Might be 150, I'm not sure, but that email will be going out to members very, very, very soon. Chris will probably end up talking a little bit more about that. And of course, we also have other events coming up, and you can go under the Alberta Prosperity Project page here, go under events, and we'll find out what's going on. We've also got a pension, Alberta pension plan discussion going out in January and February. And so there's going to be a lot of stuff coming up in the next few months. So I hope that people will go to that site to take a look at that. Now, with enough of that rambling from myself, what I'm going to say is that tonight's episode is called The Road to Socialism is Paved with Good Intentions, also known as What is Socialism Really? With Matthew Mitchell, who's a senior fellow in the Center for Economic Freedom at the Fraser Institute. We'll be discussing in particular what was the experience for people in Poland and Estonia who were forced to live under socialism, and how did their lives materially improve as soon as they were able to transition to a market economy. And of course, we'll also have APP's interim CEO, Chris Scott, who will be joining us as well. This is a live webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout this presentation. Just put 3 question marks before your question so it's flagged and we can quickly view the questions. And with that, I will now bring on Chris and Matt. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Kerry and Matt.
Hi, how are you guys?
We're doing amazing. How about yourself?
Great, thank you.
Good, good. So, Matt, you are a fellow at the Fraser Institute. Why don't you maybe just give a little bit of a spiel on what that is, what your background is, and then especially why we're going to be talking about socialism today.
Absolutely. So the Fraser Institute is a leading national think tank in Canada, but also an international think tank. One of our sort of signature products is the Economic Freedom of the World report. So this was a brainchild of the founder of the Institute, Mike Walker, back in the 1980s. I think they were at a meeting of the Mont Pelerin Society out shortly after 1984, and they were discussing Orwell's 1984. And he was talking with Milton Friedman and Milton's wife, and he had this kind of crazy idea. He said, what if we tried to measure freedom? And I think Milton probably at first really rejected the idea. And then as I understand it, Mike Walker convinced Rose Friedman that this was a worthy pursuit. And so they held these series of conferences, had some several hundred economists, including Nobel laureates, come together, and they developed this really successful measure of economic freedom. And so that's the project that I head up. I'm a PhD economist trained at George Mason University. Now we commission this report by several eminent scholars, Jim Gortney, Bob Lawson, Ryan Murphy, and every year we rank 160 jurisdictions around the world based on how much freedom they permit their citizens. And it's been a really, extraordinarily successful project insofar as there have now been thousands of peer-reviewed academic studies that cite this and use it to help explain, incredible differences in the human condition across time and across space based on the degree of freedom people have.
Yeah. Well, that would be interesting. Can you tell us where Canada sits?
So, Canada has always been in the top 10 or 15. Any one year in the index, I think, is probably less informative than, sort of where it's going. It's a relatively free, economically free country, and I think that does explain the relative prosperity of Canada. I'm from the United States, and, I get frustrated with our lack of freedom here, and I'm sure you get frustrated with the lack of freedom in Canada as well. But it is nice to remind ourselves every so often that, actually, it's not so bad. So right now, Canada actually is right at number 10. The United States is right at number 5. So, we're basically kind of where we've been for a while.
Yeah.
And who's number 1?
Number 1 right now is Singapore.
Oh,
so
okay.
for as long as they've been doing the report, number 1 was this little jurisdiction known as Hong Kong. But in the last year, it's fallen precipitously as mainland China has sort of clamped down on Hong Kong's. They weren't intending to clamp down on their economic freedom as much as their political freedom and civil rights, but it sort of bleeds over into that stuff as well.
Okay. So this is a metric of economic freedom.
It is, and there's another project that we do called the Human Freedom Index, which then it takes economic freedom, and then we also add various indicators for personal freedom. So the civil, the ability to the freedom of press, the freedom of association, those types of things, and then combine them for a Human Freedom Index as well.
That's awesome. I can't help myself. Do you recall who's number 2?
Let's see. So this year Hong Kong went to number 2 because Singapore took its place.
Okay.
And who does number 2 work for? I had to do it. I'm sorry.
You knew that.
I don't know why I answered your question.
No, that's fantastic, because that's, where else can people go to get that kind of information to compare how we're doing policy and government wise, if not for that, right? That's a pretty neat.
Yeah.
Pretty neat
And
thing.
so this is the FraserInstitute.org website, and of course there's a bunch of different reports on that. I believe the one that we're going to be talking about today is a different website, and it is this one, The Realities of Socialism, right?
Yeah, so this is a project we launched this year, and part of this is inspired just by the half-life of historical memory. Some of us are old enough to remember being around TV sets and watching the Berlin Wall fall, but that's now been over 30 years, and
Wow.
so there's now a majority of Canadians, a majority of Americans are just not old enough to have any kind of a working memory of what
That's true.
actual socialism was like. And
That's
at the
right.
same time, about half of Canadians and half of Americans, especially as you go into younger generations, think that socialism would be a better system than what we have today.
Yeah.
And the evidence, just the historical record, could not dispute that any more clearly.
Yeah. And just again for our viewers, we have viewers that are in Alberta, that are in Canada, that are in the US. However, our stretch goes all over the world, believe it or not. So I think we need to kind of just at least talk about what is the difference between socialism, what's the difference between capitalism, and again communism, because socialism and communism here in Canada, depending on if you go on X or Twitter and you see who's actually banging on the keyboard, they use those terms interchangeably. And I think that kind of gets us into a bit of hot water, because people just think that, if you're a socialist, you're just, we're going down a bad road. And I think the reason why we called it, socialism is a road paved with good intentions is because in its fundamental form, it is, right. And I beg people to basically say, no, it's not going to work at all. But if you actually look at it, all we're trying to do is put the power back to the people, right. And especially with the Alberta Prosperity Project, we basically want to be able to educate people so that they're basically their own makers of their own destiny, their own prosperity. And versus if you're a capitalist, you might be thinking, well, that's the best way to go. But the issue is, well, there's always going to be a boss, and that boss is always going to be the one that's making the money. So maybe we should have a quick discussion about those so that we're all in the same level playing field for terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the original sort of classic definition of socialism comes, from the socialists themselves. Marx and Engels probably most prominently. They had a beautiful way with the human language, or the English language. Actually, they spoke, they could write beautifully, and at times they could be quite succinct. So, in the Communist Manifesto, they put it very simply. They said the theory of communism can be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. And so the basic idea, the classic definition of socialism is that private property is abolished. All property is owned in collective as a group, by the state, and the state owns and operates all business. So the means of production is in the hands of the state. Now, Marx, socialism had been around for hundreds of years by the time Marx got on the scene. His contribution was to describe what he called, and his followers called, scientific socialism. And they were trying to kind of differentiate this from the previous socialists, whom they called utopian socialists. It wasn't all that scientific in our modern sense. In many ways, actually, the utopians were more scientific in that they actually tested it. The utopian socialists actually tried these little communes to see if they could, and tweaked it, and were willing to experiment. Marx, his version of socialism, the reason he said it was scientific is because he claimed to have understood really the progression of history. He claimed to understand exactly all the stages of human society, and he claimed to understand what was going to come in the future. So, for example, he believed that after feudalism comes capitalism.
Yeah.
And after capitalism comes socialism. And you have to have capitalism before socialism, according to Marx, because capitalism builds up all this prosperity. And Marx waxed poetic about how productive capitalism could be.
Yeah.
He has this quote about how in scarce 100 years the bourgeoisie has created more wealth than has ever existed ever before. So he says you got to have capitalism, and then you have to have socialism, where it's a revolt of the oppressed workers against the capitalists because they believe that they are being exploited. And then communism is actually this future stage in which it's sort of a utopian dream in which the state actually withers away. And you're just left, you don't have to have all this power of coercion. You don't have to have a KGB anymore or any of that stuff. You just have people working in harmony and for the good of the community. So the communists themselves actually use the term socialism and communism interchangeably. But if you're kind of following closely what they're saying, communism is really something that is to be realized in the future. They were living in a socialist state. That's what they talked about at the time.
Okay.
A utopian future where personal accountability and freedom of thought is unnecessary because Ingsoc does all of it for you.
Yeah, and there was this sort of idea that humans would become we'd be better people once we were all living in the socialist or communist utopia. They called it the Soviet man or the socialist man, the socialist woman, and there would be people would be less greedy, less avaricious, more honest. So they paint a picture of a beautiful life. Basically this phrase from Engels sticks in my head. It's free of all the toil, they can ascend to the kingdom of humanity. So it's just this idea that once we've taken care of the problem of supplying the day-to-day goods, everything's going to work out, really, really well.
Unfortunately, people forget that there always has to be somebody to do the toiling.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So there was a hell of a lot of toiling in the Soviet Union. So one thing to keep in mind is that we don't have to. Marx's idea of scientific socialism was never tested. There was no scientific method to it. But from the standpoint of 2023, we can look back and see an experiment really was run. 1/3 of the globe was put under the yoke of socialism for differing periods of time, but 5 decades in the case of Poland, 7 decades in the case of the Soviet Union, many decades in Southeast Asia. So we know the results of this experiment, and we can say exactly how it turned out.
Yeah, there is no guessing there. So our friend Murray Graham, he brings up a good point. So in Alberta, we have a group called Hutterites. They live in colonies, almost like a commune. They take care of themselves, and then when their colony gets to a certain size, they branch off and start another colony. And in this case, it is a form of, I guess you would say it's a form of communism, but it works because it's not just based on government policy or a government ideology. It's based on something higher than themselves, which is their God and their religion, right? So that's a bishop who is leading the colonies based on biblical values, which is much, much different than a secular society trying to do the same thing based on, man's values.
Mhm.
I think that's right. And the utopian socialists that I was talking about earlier that had these experiments in the 19th century in Canada and the U.S. and elsewhere, a lot of them were religiously motivated. I think I would point out one other real key aspect that differentiates those types of experiments from the socialist experiment is the ability to exit. So,
Yes.
anybody who wants to be a part of a commune can join right now. There's nothing stopping them.
That's
And
true.
arguably, most households, small little households are run sort of like a little socialist state. There's
Mhm.
parents who kind of make the rules, and the kids kind of have to follow. And the kids have rights, but they don't have as many rights as adults, right?
Mhm.
Um, that's very, very different, though, from trying to govern a society of 1 million people or 30 million people, and you're not allowed to leave.
Mhm.
You literally have no right of exit. Not only could you not exit the country, but the Soviet Union had this really elaborate, vast system of internal passports where you had a document that you needed this document to do anything from go to the post office and pick up mail to get married, even to die. You couldn't die without this internal passport. You couldn't legally die. Um,
Could you go to a restaurant?
um, so you could go to you had certain rights of consumption. You could go to
Yeah.
restaurants. You couldn't go and buy a house.
Okay.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The experiment in communal housing is really just extraordinarily bizarre.
Wow.
So you could buy little things, but not big things. But importantly, you couldn't leave your community. If you
Yeah.
were a farmer, you couldn't
Okay.
go to the city and work in the city, or vice versa. They needed you, and they where you were. That's what they wanted you. So
So did you want to jump into the website and discussion on what
yeah,
we
sure.
can look at
So
for
so
socialism?
yeah, if you go to the website,
Yeah.
you can click around. We've got 4 studies up on Poland, Sweden, Denmark,
Yeah.
and Estonia, and we'll soon be releasing Singapore. I'm sure astute listeners are scratching their heads and saying, "Wait, some of these are not communist or socialist countries," and that's
Mhm.
absolutely right. Part of the reason we have Sweden and Denmark on there is that they are often talked about in North America as if they are socialist countries. They are
Yeah.
not. So we talked about the Economic Freedom of the World Index just a little bit ago. Sweden and Denmark are among some of the most economically free countries in the world, actually.
Mhm.
They
Yeah.
have an
Really?
exception to that. They have very large government states or government sectors, so they tax a lot and they spend a lot, and though they do it a little bit differently than we do in North America.
Mhm.
But other dimensions of economic freedom, interestingly enough, they beat Canada and the United States. So it's easier to start a business. There are fewer regulations,
Okay.
better protection of persons and their property. They have a better record on free trade. And a better record on inflation than the United States and Canada. So they are really actually quite economically free places. The exception is they have large welfare states. So the state isn't trying to own and control businesses, but it does have a pretty big safety net. Now, one thing that's interesting about the safety net, though, is it's not really funded the way we in the United States or in Canada fund our safety nets. Their safety net is their primary taxes are income and sales taxes, and they're relatively high rates, but the top rate kicks in at a really low level.
Mhm.
So it's basically something that just about everybody pays for. So it's a quite different system.
Yeah.
Um, than we have. So anyway, but Poland and Estonia are the books that I've recently been authoring. We've got a pre-release of Estonia up on the website now. Tomorrow, the full book will be available. And if you scroll down, you can see we've got a lot of shareable infographics. We've got podcasts. We've got videos, and we've got more videos coming. We also have a poll in which we asked people in the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Australia what they their perceptions of socialism, what they believe socialism to be, whether they favor socialism, sort of to contextualize it. So anyway, I invite your listeners to please check it out. Let us know what you think about it, and share it with your friends and family, and anybody who is too young to remember the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Now, again, so the fall of the Berlin Wall was communism versus socialism, wasn't it?
So I mean, the Berlin Wall. So this is, at this point, we're talking 1989. This was one of the East Germany was one of the many puppet states of the Soviet Empire. And so, at this point, it's social. Communism was this dream that we might eventually have communism, but this was really, the reality was socialism versus capitalism. And along East and West Germany after the war had lived, side by side for a little while. And the socialists, their dream really was to outproduce the capitalists. So this is really important. A lot of people on the left today are sort of they are self-described anti-materialists. Their goal is to live in a society where we don't care about what we produce or what we have.
Except for
the
their
original. Yeah, exactly. The original socialists, though, they're not like that. While they did kind of believe that that capitalism maybe led to commodification of relationships and things like that, or maybe too much materialism, they weren't exactly anti-materialist. Marx himself, believed that socialism would just outproduce capitalism. And so, you probably know the famous example of Khrushchev taking his shoe off and beating it on the desk at the United Nations. And he said, "We will bury you." That actually was not a militaristic threat. That was an empirical claim that socialism was going to outproduce capitalism. He believed that that by organizing things through the state, having the government control the means of production, getting rid of all this, they thought it was wasteful to have multiple firms competing and for the business of a consumer, that they thought that was redundant. He thought by having everybody work with one plan, one set of regulations, they could outproduce the capitalists. But early on in Germany, that was clearly not the case, and the East Germans kept going to the West, and so the communist leaders there built a wall overnight, and it lasted, I think, some 30 years. Amazingly, now the Berlin Wall has been down for longer than it was ever up. But I think people seem to have forgotten the major lessons of it.
Yeah. Did we want to talk about what you've researched on Poland and Estonia?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So let's maybe begin with Poland, I think. Okay. So, the important part here is what happened in Moscow in August 23rd, 1939. So what happened on that date is the German leader, von Ribbentrop, he was the head, he was basically the German foreign minister, was welcomed in Moscow by the Soviets. When he landed, there were 6 giant swastikas flying in the Soviet capital. Interestingly enough, they had been recently taken from a communist movie studio where they had just weeks before been used as props in an anti-German, anti-Nazi propaganda. Now they were the Soviets were using them to welcome von Ribbentrop. He's rushed to the Kremlin, where he meets actually with Stalin himself, and they sign the infamous Nazi-Soviet pact. And so what the pact did is it did 2 things. One was publicly it committed the Germans and the Soviets to non-aggression. But the really important thing is what it did secretly. So it had secret protocols that divided up Europe. and it said the Germans get West Poland, the Soviets get East Poland, the Soviets get the Baltic states, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. They get all of the other states that we now know as being a part of the Soviet sphere. So this part was secret. Nobody was supposed to know about it. Afterwards, Stalin toasts to Hitler's health. They sign the pact, and very soon afterwards, they begin operating the plan. And so within the month, so this was August and of 1939. By September 1939, the Germans invade Poland from the west. The Soviets invade Poland from the east. They meet up. They have a joint Soviet and German parade in Brest-Litovsk, and they celebrate.
Mhm.
And so people then, of course, may be thinking or may remember, well, wait, wasn't the Soviet Union eventually on the side of the Allies? And that's true, they were, because within 2 years, the Germans then turned on their erstwhile allies, and in 1941, the Germans invade the Soviet Union, and they actually take over all of Poland, all of Estonia, and then the Soviets have to sweep through and kick them out. So the people in Poland and the people in the Baltic states are often likened to sort of being between, two tigers. They're just constantly being invaded, and this is, historically true actually for a long time. In Estonia, they'd been for thousands of years invaded by the Danes and the Swedes and the Germans and the Poles and everybody. But during World War II, they would just go through this, massive sweep from one side to the other, the Germans sweeping through, and then later the Soviets sweeping through. When everything settles, the Soviets are in control of both the Baltic states and Poland. And so for the next 5 decades, they imposed their rule. In Poland, they actually, set up a puppet government. They appoint, all the top people in the government, especially in the military, are actually Russian, not Polish. Eventually, they get Polish leaders, but they need to be very loyal to the Soviet Union. And in Estonia, they're actually completely annexed into the Soviet Union. So Estonia is taken into the Soviet Union as a vassal state. Essentially, they're made like a province of the Soviet Union, or like a state of the Soviet Union. So they're in control for 5 decades, in both cases. And so the experiment starts to play out, and so now we can kind of test, and we can see, okay, well, what is the claim that Marx made, that Khrushchev made, that socialism was going to outproduce the capitalists? We can see it's just not true. So, in the case of Estonia, we've got this nice comparison because right after they invade Poland, they moved on Estonia, put 160,000 troops at the border to Estonia's 16,000 troops, and they basically forced them to come into their country. They also then move on Finland. And in the famous Winter War, the Finns put on skis and pick up guns, and they chased the Soviets out, actually. The Soviets end up suing for peace. They basically decide it's not worth their fight. They do get to take, I think, something like 9% of Finland's land, including a lot of the industrialized property, and the Finns have to write checks to the Soviet Union for several years. Also ridiculous. And the Finnish president actually says, when he signs this agreement with the Soviets, he says, may the hand that signs this treaty wither and die. He was just so ashamed of himself for signing this treaty, but it ended up giving them freedom. Even though they had to give away 9% of their country and write checks to the Soviets, they gained their freedom. Now, interestingly enough, this president, what do you suppose happened to his hand? Within months, it was paralyzed.
Come on.
Like ridiculous, but it's actually true. So one of those crazy facts of history. So anyway, the Finns and the Estonians, they're right across the Gulf of Finland from one another. They share this culture, this geography, this history, the Finno-Ugric language. And so there's a lot of ways that we can see the comparison. Now, before the Soviets took over, the Estonians were wealthier than the Finns. They earned about 84% more. We then fast forward to the end of the socialist regime, and by the early 1990s, the Estonians are earning 20% of what the Finns are earning. So, in terms of material prosperity, the Finns were just far, far ahead. Now, okay, it's not all about dollars and cents. We want to know what are other, that's not the only thing that matters in life.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out the Finns were living 10 years longer than the Estonians. It turns out the Estonian death rate, infant mortality rate, was 3 times as high as the Finnish infant mortality rate. It turns out that in order to work for basic necessities and goods, the Estonians had to work, 5-6 times as long as their neighbors to the north in Finland, just to earn, basic necessities. And you see the same thing with Poland as well. Lower incomes, shorter lifespan, higher infant mortality rate. And then the interesting thing is, it's not just, corroded their ability to produce. It also had this corrosive effect on the culture. And this happened really in both countries. And there's Estonians and Poles will talk about this. So, one of the things that happens is, if you live in a society where you can't get stuff, you can't go to the grocery store and buy meat because it's not there, then you have to rely on a system called blot, was the Russian word for it. But it's basically corruption. So the only way you can get, the necessities of life is, and you don't have to have money, you have to have connections. And so then it gets this weird system where you have, if you're high up in the Communist Party, or you're a manager at a store, you've got access to goods and services that normal Poles, normal Estonians don't have. And you're able to use this. This is actually part of the reason why it was such a shortage economy, is managers figured out that by purposely throttling the goods and services, purposely making sure that they weren't on the shelves, they could then sell them in the black market.
That's right.
And so some of it, and the Soviets, the socialist leaders actually tolerated this, in part because with a relatively flat compensation system, there was no way to get the people to want to be in those positions where they're where you're rewarding top managers. So they looked the other way to allow these managers to obtain blot, money, illegal bribes from the black market for selling this stuff. Eventually, the communists also just had overt privileges for the elite. So if you were in the top of the party, not only could you accept bribes, but you had your own stores that you could go and shop and buy Western goods that were actually there, unlike the rest of the population. You had your own health plan. You had your own vacation plan. You could hunt in your own exclusive hunting resorts or relax.
Are you describing the European Union?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they have those things.
Exactly.
The EU members of parliament.
Yeah, no, it's the kind of corruption you do see, in systems all throughout the world. But here it was in this supposedly egalitarian state.
So how does it go from, a socialist dream where everyone's taken care of and treated equally and you have an equality of outcome, to a brutally tyrannical regime where, the peasants are constantly wanting and the elite are getting fat off the fruits of their labor? How does that happen?
So, one way to answer that is it happens fast. So it did in both countries. It happened really quick. What we identify is there's essentially three spheres of problems that they dealt with. One, I think you can probably understand pretty easily, or anybody can appreciate, is the incentive problem. So, think about the incentive of a collective farm. So they have this dream. The Poles, thankfully, didn't have farms collectivized, but the Estonians did. So Stalin had this dream of turning agriculture into this great, state-run industrialized system. And his way to get there was through collective farms. And so the idea here is you've got maybe 300 farmers in a community, and you all are forced to come together and share everything. So you even have to share the the property, the productive property, like the tractor and the horse and the cows. And the socialists have different experiments over time. Eventually, they tried semi-privatizing that, but that still didn't work. So they have so you share everything. You share the productive property, but then you also have to share what it produces. Well, if you're a farmer, think about it. Are you going to work from sun up to sundown? Are you going to maintain the tractor, make sure that the cattle are well fed and are in good shape, and work extra hard to increase the productivity just so you can share it with 299 other farmers?
Yeah,
No.
and that you remove the reward portion of it. You remove the carrot. So in absence of a reward or the carrot, out comes the stick.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So that comes to the next problem, is the control problem. And by the way, the world's worst famines occurred in the 20th century, and they occurred in communist countries. So 7 million people died in the Ukrainian famine, and it was entirely man-made. And it's when you start to read about a famine, you can hear the word famine, and that sounds pretty awful. It's absolutely horrific. Humans eating humans, killing members of their families, eating dirt. It's humanity at its absolute worst. And it was entirely avoidable because it was Stalin's dream to outproduce the capitalists, and he thought it would work. So yeah, it's disgusting. So yeah, that's the incentive problem, and then you have the control problem. Out comes the stick. So if you look at Estonia, they tried for about a decade to get the Estonians to join collective farms, and the Estonians didn't want to do it. And they kind of tried everything that they could think of. They cajoled them. They tried to use slogans. They vilified anybody who was remotely successful. They made up a class. They called them kulaks. It was an old Russian term for basically a farmer who probably got what he got by being conniving or thieving somehow. And they
said the same thing in Ukraine.
Yes,
they had
did.
A class
absolutely.
made up for. Yeah.
Exactly. And Stalin, made this statement that we're going to liquidate the kulaks as a class. Now, the kulaks aren't a class. They're not an ethnic group. They're nothing. There's nothing cohesive about it. But they empowered 3 people: the local Communist Party leader. Now that's interesting. Look, my thumb goes up and it
that.
up.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where that comes from. That's crazy. So they empower these 3 local party officials, essentially. Yeah, you can't do it. I can do it though.
Oh, weird.
Maybe I can.
There it goes.
Interesting. So they empower these local party officials to determine who's a kulak. And we have quotes from the party officials themselves that say, we just make it up. We can designate anybody as a kulak we want. So they vilify them, and then they round them up and they send them to Siberia. So what happened was, all of these tricks to try to get the Estonians to join collective farms just didn't work. And so one night in 1949, they drove in a bunch of American-made Studebaker trucks, and they just started rounding up people. And they put them on these trucks and they sent them east. When all was said and done, it was about, I think it was 20,000. It was about 14 to 18% of the farming population.
It's a big number.
Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
big number. They separate the men from the women and children. The women and children were sent to Siberia, where they're basically just kind of on their own in exile. And so they don't. This was a very cheap system where you don't have to have prison guards or anything. You just send them to this wasteland, and they have to try to figure out how they're going to survive.
Wow.
And so they survived by digging holes in the ground and eating grass. And many of them did not survive. About 50% of the women were dead within in a few years. And then they sent the men to prison labor camps. So about 16 to 18% of all labor in the Soviet Union was slave labor. They that was again part of why they thought they were going to be so productive is well, we're just going to force people to be productive. And they some of them are these silly projects, you know, the White Sea Canal, which predated the invasion of Estonia, but this was this sort of dream project of this building the super long canal. About, I think 25,000 people died in building it, and
Jeez.
by the time it was done, it was useless. It was only 3 meters deep. They were digging, you know, with their hands and with shovels. You know, absolutely ridiculous. So you've got the incentive problem and the control problem. And then finally, there's a problem with knowledge, which is the price system harnesses information and helps people plans coordinate in a very subtle way that we don't always appreciate. And so without, you know, actual consumers being able to, you know, produce or being able to make choices about what they want to buy, the state didn't really know what people wanted.
Mhm.
So it had no trouble making, you know, fancy space exploration, missiles and
That's
military
right. Yeah.
equipment. But you know, there's women who lived through the time will say they couldn't find in any female sanitary products anywhere. That was just not a priority for the leaders. And that's kind of like sort of the best example I can give if you're trying to understand what is the knowledge problem. It's just the problem that if you're if you don't actually aren't making something that you sell to a willing customer that chooses to buy it or chooses not to buy it, you have no idea how to make anything that anybody wants. And so you're left with a bunch of stuff that nobody wants.
Can I just divert this just a little bit
Yeah.
from Europe and move over to South America? Like we recently saw a collapse of a first world country of Venezuela,
Mhm.
and it seems like there was a lot of the same kind of policy decisions made down there, which resulted in people burning money in the streets and eating zoo animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what kind of things did we see there? And with all the history we have of these social experiments going on and failing, what in the world happened in a place like Venezuela that was one of the wealthiest places ever, abundant resources, grow food all year long, to end up eating zoo animals?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really extraordinary how often you see this played out over and over and over again. You know, to me, it's just a relatively simple lesson, which is that freedom works. You grant people economic freedom to start their own businesses, to run their own lives. Not only is that, you know, beneficial from a philosophical perspective because you deserve to be able to run your own affairs just as much as I do, but it turns out it's an extraordinarily powerful, economically productive system to allow people to start and run their own businesses and do what they want. Um, Now, the problem that you have, I think, is that on the one hand, people are lured into this, dream of socialism and equality, and especially in the hands of a demagogue, that could be very powerful, and
Mhm.
especially if they're willing to scapegoat, the rich or the capitalists or the kulaks or whatever, for any problem that they're experiencing. But then you also do have a problem that there are people who benefit from a socialist system.
Yeah.
That's certainly true. If you happen to be in the top, in the party leadership, that's a great spot to be in, at least for a little while, because of all those privileges that we talked about, and because of the ability to control all those resources. So it's really difficult to get out of that trap once you're in it.
Would it be realistic to say that socialism is a very seductive idea? Like it preys on people's desire to have either more than they have, or
Mhm.
maybe more comforts than they already have?
Absolutely, I think so, and especially if you look at sort of the claims that socialists make. They painted a picture of capitalism with great inequality, political suppression, stagnation. They said the capitalists robbed the soil, they robbed the labor, that capitalism leads to commodification and alienation and worker revolt, recurring crises. Now, the fascinating thing, and I'm not the first to make this observation, but the fascinating thing is every single one of those descriptions that I just gave applied to the socialist countries, the countries that actually tried socialism. Marx was 100% accurate if you just replace the words capitalism with socialism. By the early 1980s, there was really not too many true believers in the Soviet Union, in Poland, in Estonia, because the obvious contradiction in the system, the obvious lies, were just so apparent. And
Mhm.
in much of Eastern Europe, it was young people who really led the revolt against socialism, and that's how the system fell.
Well, and actually, I was just going to chime in and say, what's happening now, and it may be slightly different in the U.S., but I think it's probably very, very the same. We've got a generation of a younger generation that's gone through their schooling, gone through their university. They're now coming out. It's difficult to find a job. It's difficult to afford housing. They've got all these issues that they can point down to. Well, it's because of all the billionaires of capitalism. And so romantically, you're looking at socialism for this coming out. They're looking at it and saying, this will help solve everything because we're now going to redistribute the wealth. Everyone's going to be happy. Everyone will have a universal basic income. Everyone will have a house, and everyone can just go on living their life all great. However, as you've just said, in the history is definitely going to repeat itself if we go down that path.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And part of the problem, in the West is that we have very entangled systems.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have free enterprise in Canada or the United States. We have, mixed economies where you have quite free sectors. Retail trade is quite free. People are, by the way, pretty happy with retail trade, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Grocery stores are relatively free. But then you have other other sectors of the economy where the state is highly involved: energy, healthcare.
Yeah, that's right.
I would point out that these are the parts of the system that people are least happy with, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. So I just got to point this out. If anybody watching has not read the book 1984 by George Orwell,
Yeah.
or maybe you don't have time to read the book, watch the movie. It's a little bit dry and it's kind of tough to watch the way it's filmed. But I can't think of a better description of a socialist utopian or dystopian future than that book. I mean, in the book, the state, it's called INGSOC, which stands for English Socialism, basically tells people that everything is grand and everything is great, and they believe it, even though they're living in this barren wasteland and they don't have enough of anything. They're not allowed to think for themselves. The media controls everything, and the Ministry of Truth tells them what to think. But they also tell them that this is perfect and everything is great and it's working excellent while the world's crumbling around them. And we see this today. I mean, the people in Venezuela, I bet you there was people like us watching these things occur around them, that were aware that things were crumbling while the state was telling them how great everything was and how great everything was going to be. Like, that's what's really mind-blowing here. And it comes back to this human nature trait that we all have, which is we want to believe those things which confirm our own biases and keep us in our comfort zone.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to believe that socialism is the answer, they're going to see that it's the answer regardless of the zebras on the barbecue in their backyard.
Yeah, no, that's true. Now,
and this is a problem.
And Orwell, one of the party phrases that appears a couple of times in that book is who controls the past controls the future.
That's right.
And who controls the present controls the past. And the point here there is, if you can rework history, if you can control how people think about history, then you have a hold on today, and you have a hold on tomorrow. And what's interesting about Estonia is that they really started to take control of their destiny once they started taking control of their history. So, if you'll permit me here a minute to talk, about the Estonian, post-socialism. So, what happened was, Gorbachev comes on the scene, 1985. There's a series of his predecessors had all been quite old and had died in office. Reagan is saying, I can't get to know any of these guys because they keep dying right as soon as I meet them.
That's right.
So Gorbachev is the first post-communist revolution leader, and he is a different guy. There's two things that he wants to do. He talks about reform, perestroika, he called it, and glasnost. Which is openness. Perestroika amounts to basically nothing. He's not really willing to reform the system in any meaningful way. It was nothing more meaningful than anybody before him. But he was willing to be open about the past, more open than anybody else. And he actually was willing to let Poland and the other satellite states, East Germany, go. He was not willing to let Estonia and the other Baltic states go. He was still referring to it to their annexation as a marriage. The Estonians believed it was a rape, not a marriage. It was not voluntary. Yeah. And so while the Berlin Wall falls in 1989, it's not until 1991 that Estonia gains some freedom. So let's talk a little bit about that, because it's kind of a cool story. So one of the things that they do is they start relying on their culture. And Estonia has a very unique culture. They have been, a big part of it is singing. So for thousands of years, the Estonians have been getting together in forests and singing these ancient songs in like call and response fashion. And so they would have these song festivals. And the Soviets could never actually stop the song festivals. They just tried to steer them in their direction. So they would allow them to get together and have these song festivals where they'd all get together and sing love songs to Stalin and Lenin. And then when that was done, the Estonians would start singing their own traditional songs in their own tongue. The Soviet bands would try to drown them out, and they just could never do it, because you get 20, 30,000 people together and they're singing, and there's no way to stop that.
Yeah.
And it was also kind of led by young people too. So there were new, some of these are 1,000-year-old songs, but some of them are also these, new rock songs from the 1980s that they're singing. So they start openly talking about the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That was really, you mentioned Orwell. They started controlling the past, the narrative on the past. And another remarkable thing that they did, they organized with the people in Latvia and Lithuania. They organized what's called the Baltic Way. So on the anniversary of the infamous Soviet Nazi pact, 2 million people, thank you, Chris, 2 million people join hands in a 560-mile or kilometer stretch of humanity going across 3 countries.
Wow.
And all they're doing is they're just standing and they're holding hands and they're doing it on the day of the Soviet Nazi pact, which at that point they still were denying that there was any secret pact. They had never made any secret pact with the Nazis. And Gorbachev, for all his openness, was dismissive of this. He said they're just trying to, they're basically just hooligans, and don't give them any heed. But the Estonians and the Latvians and the Lithuanians were smart about this. They made sure that there were Western cameras. They even hired a helicopter and had photos taken of all of this. So the world knew about it, and within months, the Soviets had to finally admit that the Soviet Nazi pact had existed. And that was key because that basically showed that it was illegally annexed. Canada and the United States never had recognized their annexation as a legal, as legal. And this net was sort of now saying, yeah, we're admitting that it's not legal either. So ultimately what happened is when there was a failed coup against Gorbachev, the hardliners tried to depose him. You may remember Boris Yeltsin, who was the head of Russia at the time, denounced the coup leaders. And in the sort of chaos of all this, the Estonians themselves declared their independence. There were tanks sent to Estonia. They surrounded the TV tower in Tallinn in Estonia. There were 4 men in the top of the tower, and the tanks were getting ready to break down the door. One of these policemen in the top of the tower, he's a sort of a local hero. He threatened to pull the Freon fire extinguishing system in this TV tower and kill everybody in the tower, including himself. The Soviets decided, okay, well, let's talk about this a little bit more. And so the leaders decide what to do for another 10 hours before they want to break down the door. And in the meantime, the coup falls apart in Moscow, and Estonia is able to declare independence. Russia actually declares independence from the Soviet Union, sort of bizarre, and the tanks turn around and they go home. So they sort of take advantage of this opportunity of the chaos. But it started by telling the truth about their history, and it's remarkable. They did this by singing and holding hands.
What was that called when they did that?
So they call it the singing revolution, because what ended up happening is you had at one point 300,000 Estonians spontaneously show up at the singing grounds, the historical singing grounds, and they start singing not love songs to Stalin and Lenin, but love songs to their country of Estonia, and also some hate songs to Lenin and Stalin. They talk about the ruble crushing them, and it's like stones to. There's pretty graphic language. They actually say it's like scabies to your groin and stones to your heart. It's pretty remarkable. But they did it singing. So so 300,000 people is 1/3 of the country. Wow. So 1/3 of the country shows up and they start singing, and the most feared empire in the world essentially gives up Estonia, and it's felled by song and holding hands. Nobody could have guessed that, but it's really remarkable.
Yeah.
I got to point something out. I think Kerry is probably feeling the same thing that I am right now. Yeah. It wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 years ago that I was even aware of the singing revolution. But I remember looking at pictures of this. I'm like, what the heck is this? And I did some reading, and I thought, holy crap. Well, lo and behold, just a couple short years later, Kerry and I are in a honking revolution with trucks bumper to bumper for hundreds of kilometers across this country.
Almost interlocking bumpers. Wouldn't that have been a show? Yeah.
And of course, the situation is different for sure. The number of people and the percentage of population is different for sure. But, these types of things that are historical events that don't happen that often are occurring to some degree in this country of Canada.
Mhm. So Lenin probably never said this, but it's attributed to him, that there are years when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen.
Yeah,
And
it's
that
true.
that does seem to be true.
Is that what you were going to say, Kerry? Were you feeling that too?
Well, I was actually going to bring up a couple of different things. For me, the parallels of what you're just talking about, I can, and I'm sure every viewer is basically saying that could happen in Canada. That could happen in Canada because we've got a leader who is taken over the media, and Justin Trudeau taken over the media, and he's basically telling everyone that he's narcissistic, and people should be singing praises to him, and I even wonder whether or not back in old school Russia, whether the media was able to convince people to actually like Stalin and Lenin, or whether or not people just decided that on their own accord. Again, we're totally different times because now we have the propaganda of the internet. We're not getting one paper a day. We're not listening to a radio station and that. We get multiple sources. So we're kind of inundated with a bunch of different streams. And there are people that, that gravitate towards mainstream media, and they just listen to all the praises about Justin Trudeau and how great Canada is. And then we have other people who are more independent minded. We're, looking at individual journalists, or maybe just we'll call it more right-wing journalists, if you want to call it that, but basically comparing the two of them, and we can see that we love Trudeau, and the other side is we hate Trudeau. And division is something that is I think, looking at it in the past, it's definitely something that you can recognize that probably happened back then, and that's what caused the division between socialism and capitalism. And again, we're seeing that right in our own eyes. We're living the history as it is. Right?
There's a divide between pharmaism and naturalism right now.
Yeah. Well, you can name anything, and there's going to be a divide to it. That's the problem now, is that people don't even have proper conversations anymore about over the dinner table, for as an example, because we've been told not to talk politics, don't talk religion, especially history. Don't worry about history. Let's just talk about things that are happening now. Yeah. And yet here we are. We're seeing it play over and over again.
Yeah. Don't talk about the thing that most affects our lives while we're on the planet, which is politics, and don't talk about the thing that affects our eternity, which is religion, and also. Don't mention history, because we might make a good decision on politics and religion in the present.
Well, and if politics were a very minor part of our lives, I think I could certainly live. I'd be happy to live in that kind of a world, and I think most of us would be happy
having
with
said that, I was just going to say. So we say this all the time in Canada. It's between 2 and 3% of the population here that actually hold a membership card in any political party. Doesn't matter which one. That is so insignificant. But in the States, and you can probably attest to it, it's like probably a third. Actually, I should know what it is, but it's ridiculously high.
I thought it was 60% in the States, and it's like 3% or 2% in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there, there's this political science literature here showing that increasingly people are not sorted by other factors. Like, there's a good aspect here. They're not sorted by race as much as they used to be, but they are increasingly sorted by party affiliation. So, the disturbingly high numbers of people don't want their children to date members of the other party. Right? It's like, what's wrong with people?
Wow.
Yeah. We can't just live all together, hold hands, and kumbaya. We just can't seem to be doing that anymore.
Yeah.
You know what? I got to point this out. You know what the difference? I think the biggest difference between Canada and the United States for our political engagement is the United States has been through civil wars. They've had revolutions.
That's true.
They've experienced these things where People just cannot find common ground on anything, and then they fight about it. Canada has not. We've just had a cushy existence for the last 150 some odd years, and we've never experienced that before. So nobody cares. Everyone's apathetic.
Well, and one of the things I think that we've lost in the U.S. is our really the original raison d'etre of the U.S. was this is a place where religious differences we're going to set them aside. That was kind of, for all our faults, and the U.S. has plenty of faults, that was a unique contribution, was the idea that, look, if the Catholics want to go to Maryland and start a colony there, have at it. The Quakers want to do what they want to do in Pennsylvania, that's awesome. Protestants will set up in Virginia, but the state's going to get out of it. And that sort of live and let live kind of ethos, I do think, seeped into the political culture and was a big identifying factor. It's the idea that I'm not going to, you have your beliefs, I have my beliefs, and I'm not going to try to change it. But I do worry that we're kind of losing that, unfortunately.
So on that note, the title of this webinar is called "The Road to Socialism is Paved with Good Intentions." So a lot of the things that would cause Canada to be described as a socialist country are socialized education, socialized healthcare, socialized infrastructure, those types of things. So if we are to continue to do those things that are necessary in a free and democratic society so that we can peacefully coexist and not leave anybody behind, how do we find a balance between proper socialist, initiatives to support society without crossing the line into government overreach and tyranny that leads to all sorts of other devastating things that we've seen across history?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, I don't think any one country does it right, but I think it is interesting to pick out, certain aspects of what countries do. So I already mentioned one aspect of the Scandinavian model that we should be interested in is the idea of widely shared burdens. The idea that you can build a welfare state just by taxing the rich, it's mathematically not possible. And it's also not a very politically stable system. But the way that the Scandinavian countries have done it is by, having high marginal tax rates that kick in at relatively low levels. And so if you're one of those people that says, I want a bigger social safety net, then I think you need to be willing to also open your own wallet and recognize that in the world, in the places that have these large safety nets, average people are paying them with high VAT taxes and high personal income taxes. I think another good model is Estonia post socialism. So Estonia, right out of the gate, they had this again. He who controls the past controls the future. Their first elected prime minister was a historian, and Mart Laar was his name. And it was funny. He had not read a lot of economics, but as a kid who was a dissident in the Soviet Union, he had heard that there was this terrible economist named Milton Friedman from the West, and so since the communists told him he was terrible, he thought, I'm going to go read that guy. So he read Milton Friedman, and he implemented a number of his ideas as prime minister, and one of them was a flat personal income tax. So Estonia instituted the world's first flat income tax. And interestingly enough, a lot of the former Soviet states adopted it. And they have a very innovative income tax too. It's a business tax that is only paid when the business actually distributes profits. It's not taxed before that. So, and there's no double taxation of income. It's very simple. Both of these are relatively low rates. They're 20%. So they're about half of the OECD average, and they bring in a lot of revenue. So both Poland and Estonia were able to actually build much better social safety nets that actually took care of their citizens after socialism fell. Their safety nets were terrible under the socialist state,
Wow.
but they actually have decent safety nets now that they have, advanced capitalist societies.
Interesting. Share the
That is-
benefit, share the burden.
Yeah.
But so yeah, just as a little bit of an aside, so the question about a flat income tax and I can see, especially if you can only get taxed when you're actually making a profit. I don't know if you're aware, but all movies and TV shows that are actually made are done by separate companies that are owned by separate groups. So say Castle Rock owns something, but an actual movie is usually the name of the title or maybe some play on words, and that's the holding company for that. And the idea is that that company will never make any money. So if you go to an actor or a producer and say you'll get 10% of the profits on this show, sign off, that sounds great. But through creative accounting, that movie will never make any money. So putting that into a corporate sort of a structure, I can see how the problem would be is we'd have all these shell companies not making any money, so that money actually wouldn't flow into the government. So there are obviously some issues with certain things, right? So
Kerry, that is exactly why. Sorry to interrupt you, Matt. That's exactly why I've always been a strong advocate for no income tax, no corporate tax. However, a consumption tax.
I like the idea of
if you're buying bread, you would not pay any tax. If you're buying a Lamborghini and you can afford a Lamborghini, well, you're going to pay a ton of tax because you're buying something that's completely ridiculous. But if you can do it, then do it and you pay the tax, right? In that way, no one's hiding from tax. No one's paying too much tax. The people that can't afford to pay tax aren't paying any tax because they're not buying luxurious items. It's but nobody seems to want to do it. I don't know why.
Yeah. Matt, do you have a state tax that you pay?
Yeah. So in New Mexico, we have a gross receipts tax, which is a relatively unusual tax in the States.
Which
but
tax?
It's called a gross receipts tax. It's kind of it's basically a sales tax that is also applied to any business. But then we also have state income taxes, and we then, of course, have property taxes, which mostly fund local government.
Yeah. So
the
similar.
Government loves their taxes.
Yeah.
And once you get a tax, you never get rid of it. We in Canada have a goods and services tax, and we're a harmonized tax depending on where you are. But essentially, it's like a flat 5%. And then each province, which would be equivalent of your state, has their own state tax or provincial tax. And Alberta is the only one that doesn't have a provincial sales tax. And of course, there are people up in arms saying, well, we should do that so that we can save money on this. And versus people like myself anyways, that are like, no, we don't need yet another tax. And then you get the issues where we actually have a city town right on the edge of Saskatchewan, next province over, and Alberta, Lloydminster. And half of the town, I guess, in theory, should be paying tax, and the other half doesn't. I'm not even sure what they actually do up there. I don't think either.
I don't know for sure, Kerry, but
yeah.
I don't think that they pay the PST on the Saskatchewan side of Lloydminster because sense. It's such an inequitable business model, right? So all the business would, I think, but don't quote me.
Everybody would move over to Alberta. There would be nothing on that side.
Right. Yeah.
But essentially, that's kind of what different models of taxation and so again, the idea why we do any of these webinars, and whether or not it's on politics or economics or law or anything, is to educate our viewers and better prepare themselves, especially if we want to have a proper discussion at the dining table during Christmas with people that may totally be, I like the idea of socialism. That's the end of it. And so this would be a great opportunity to have those conversations with I
want to meet those people, because I'll just say, that's great. Give me all your stuff and I'll give you back what you need.
I agree. Is there anything else that you want to maybe touch on, Matt? We're at about an hour and 20 minutes. We'll probably go at least another 10 more minutes here just to see.
Yeah, I think the main thing I just would want to say is kind of back to that, what Estonia in particular, but Poland too, what they were able to accomplish after. So, Estonia not only instituted the world's first flat tax, it privatized like mad, and did it in a very efficient and quick and not corrupt way, which is unique. So, when you're in a socialist state, it's really difficult if the state owns all the means of production, to hand over those means to the private sector and do it in a way that insiders don't get a fast track or any extra benefits. But they managed to do it actually pretty well. They used a system of vouchers where they basically gave people, managers and employees of the state-owned stores, they gave them a little vouchers that said, if you want, you now own 1/10 of this store. And you can sell, other people can buy it, or you can sell it, and it worked relatively well. One of the main things that they did is, if you could prove that you had owned the store before, then you could reclaim. So, there's a story of one old woman. She and her husband had owned a sort of a block on a street, and she went into her backyard and dug up a tin can of the deed that she had kept hidden for decades, because after the Soviets took it over and stole her property, and she reclaimed her property, and the state recognized it. Estonia recognized it. So they deregulated. They made it very easy to start businesses. Estonia, they had all this sort of youthful energy at the time. So the prime minister was 32. The top 3 or 4 leaders in the cabinet were all under 30. They kind of capitalized on that and built a reputation as a very entrepreneurial society. So they instituted the world's first e-government, the first government in the world where you could vote, you could get a passport, you could start a business, close a business. All of that could be done online. And they sort of reinforced it with government restrictions on the government. So the government, there's a law that says that the government cannot ask the same person the same question twice in their lifetime. So it's basically just, oh wow, look at that.
What the heck?
Twice,
That is amazing.
That was really
that was because I did this. That was weird. Yay. So they have all these mechanisms that reinforce it. Another thing that they did is they eliminated, and this is really, I have to say this as an economist, this is almost unprecedented in world history. They unilaterally eliminated all tariffs. One thing that they did, economists will wax poetic about free trade, and I will do that myself. But it's not only beneficial for in and of itself, but that was a down payment on any other reforms, because now every business in Estonia had to compete with every other business around the world, and so they couldn't afford to saddle those businesses with high tax burdens or high regulatory burdens. It was basically a commitment to freedom. So and it worked very well. So the all of those statistics that I was telling you at the beginning, early on, about the higher infant mortality rate, the lower lifespan, the lower per capita GDP, all of that has reversed. So Estonia is now, one of the freest countries in the world. They have the highest per capita GDP of any former Soviet state. I think Latvia is basically right tied with them, and they are very free as well. They had some of the fastest growth rates of any country in the world. They have more startups per capita than any country in Europe, more unicorn startups, so that's a startup valued over $1 billion, than any other country in the world on a per capita basis. They now live longer. They have a lower infant mortality rate than in Finland, and also than in the OECD. They have higher satisfaction levels with their government, with their social safety nets, with their economy than anybody else in Europe. It's a very prosperous society, and I think it's just a proof that freedom really works.
Should I look for land in Estonia?
Yeah. You should look for land that you could buy in 1992 when it was nice and cheap.
Yeah, that's right too. Yeah, that's very true. Chris, do you want to have any last words? I was looking for a couple of the questions. I mean, lots of comments. Great, things like, thank you, gentlemen. Once again, we learn history, or once we learn history, we do realize what's being and present day at an accelerated rate. Of course, that is. Comments even like this, if the Ukrainian citizens had the right to keep and bear arms, none of this would have happened. Well, I mean, that
may be true.
That's very true, and especially up here in Canada, it's legal to own a gun as long as you've got your PAL. What does PAL actually mean there?
Possession and acquisition license.
Yeah. So, but you can't really use it, as ridiculous as that sounds, other than going out to the shooting range or maybe even on your own private property. But you can't use it self-defense, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some differences between Canada and the U.S. for sure.
Well, Canada
and you guys have bigger bears than we have, at least.
Oh, that's true too. And we have big polar bears.
Canada, our system, our method of democracy is very, very critically attached to people being involved and being engaged and using their voices. I mean, the place where we go to talk to the government is called Parliament, which means to speak, right? Yeah. We don't have there's no mechanisms afforded to us in our Constitution to protect ourselves from government, tyrannical or otherwise. We do not have a right to bear arms. We have no right to form a well-armed militia, none of those things. Our democracy literally hinges on people being informed and being involved in our politics, and they are not. Yeah. And it's caused us some problems in this country, and I think we have some lessons to learn. But one of the reasons why I chose to take on this role as the CEO of the Alberta Prosperity Project is because I really believe with an effective education campaign and getting this stuff out to people in Alberta, we can start to shift the way people are thinking and their feeling about getting involved in politics. Because if we don't, I mean, it can only get worse, right? Mm-hmm. So that's my part in this, and why we continue to do these webinars. And I mean, Matt, you've been a fantastic guest. I really appreciate the depth that you've gone into some of the historical accounts of socialism across the world and how it could impact us. And it looks like from the comments, people are really appreciative as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Definitely going to be looking at the realities of socialism.org and reading that. And again, it's the whole point is that you learn from your own history. And especially if we can have the parallels of what was going on then to what is going on now. And again, our viewers are going to say, hey, that's kind of happening right now. I think we might be better off to know that. And again, use our voices and discuss this far and wide and let people know that we're not happy. And, getting back to the 300,000 people holding hands there too, figuratively and literally, if we could have 300,000 people in Alberta joining hands, or at least being, together on a certain particular topic, that would be amazing, right? We've got
1.7 million, Kerry.
I was going to say we've got 4.4 million residents, but yeah, voting is 1.7, I guess, or even more than that, I guess. But we definitely need numbers. We need numbers, and we need voices, and we need people to stand up and not just, they're so busy. And I say this over and over again, they're so busy working, taking care of their kids. They come home and they don't want to get involved. They just sit back and they're apathetic, and then they'll be the first ones bitching when shit goes sideways.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that you can take from this history is just the power of ideas. And I think they saw the world in a very different way than it seems like you two did or do. But Marx and Engels had a view of the world. Yeah, they were, right. They were trying to change hearts and minds, and they were very successful in doing it. And a lot of people suffered as a result of that. It's an incredible history making events just because of what people were writing and thinking and talking about. And we have an opportunity, and you guys are leading the way in terms of helping people see the world in a different way, and sparking maybe a different type of revolution, I would hope.
Yeah.
You're right about sharing ideas, and Kerry, you're right about discussing things. And really, what better place to do those things than at our APP webinar sponsor for this week, which is the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. Share ideas over a fresh brewed Mother Parker's coffee and a homemade cinnamon bun made every morning by yours truly.
That is
probably other delights and goodies that will make it so your pants don't fit anymore, but you'll be happier and more well educated after talking to your friends and neighbors at the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta.
There you go.
See what I did there?
What a great way to end that.
That's so smooth. Yes.
Shameless, right?
All right. With that, I'm going to say goodnight, guys. And again, thank you so much, Matt. Pleasure having you on, and we will definitely be in touch and have you on again for sure, because I know you so much knowledge. Thank you so much.
Speaking of being in touch, how can people get in touch with you? Should they have questions or comments or anything like that? Is there a mechanism for them to contact you?
Yeah. So you can go to FraserInstitute.org, and you can find my contact info should be there. You also, of course, check out the Realities of Socialism website. I'm on Twitter at I think it's Matt D. Mitchell. You can find me there as well. LinkedIn, Facebook, all of that stuff.
I will.
And last but not least,
I'll put all those links. I'll put all those links on after the video for sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Last but not least, if people want to support the work you're doing, either with a big old thank you or a big old check, where can they do that?
Please go to FraserInstitute.org.
There you go.
There you go. One-stop shop.
Let's do that. Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
With that, thank you very much. You guys have a great night. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody, as well. We do these every Wednesday, and like I said, we're actually going to do a bit of a hiatus for the next 3 weeks for the Christmas break. We are still posting the videos. We're going to be doing a kind of a best of the webinars for 2023. Chris and I still have to compile exactly what's going on, but these will be happening on Wednesdays anyways. And if you're just a new watcher here and you haven't watched at least since the beginning of 2023, there are some great episodes, and we're going to be launching those and showing those again. So,
and with that, sponsor those as well.
You can sponsor those as well. Excellent. Great. All right. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.